You are the most important person in your life, so prioritize your health, your spirit, your comfort. Take good care of yourself, it's not selfish. The world keeps spinning as if nothing happened, but no one can keep you safe. So give yourself a little peace tonight. Through this story, if you've ever whispered, "I'm tired of being hurt," come sit next to me. Leave your comments below. What finally stopped hurting? Like this video if you've overcome your old self. Subscribe for more silent revolutions like this. And now, take a breath. Here we go. How to let go from someone who hurts you. You don't always know you're asleep until something jolts you awake. Elena had always thought of herself as the strong one, the dependable friend, the forgiving partner, the woman who gave second, third, and sometimes fourth chances because she believed in the goodness of people, especially him. His name doesn't matter now. What matters is the way he entered her life gently, almost reverently, like someone who had read her loneliness like a map and followed it straight to her front door. He never shouted, he never hit, but somehow every time Elena smiled, he made her feel like she was trying too hard. He criticized softly, just joking, he'd say when she winced at the sarcasm. Don't take things so seriously. He left her feeling confused, often guilty for feelings he had triggered. She began apologizing for everything, for crying, for asking questions, for needing affection, even for simply being tired. Months turned into years. The relationship looked fine from the outside, and that made it harder for her to name the unease. She'd tell herself, "He doesn't cheat, he doesn't yell, he brings me coffee in the morning." And yet her heart shrunk a little more each week. And then came the jolt. It wasn't a grand betrayal, not a dramatic affair or a fight. It was one night late when Elena walked into the living room to find him laughing on the phone saying, "She's so easy to control. Just act nice for a few days and she folds." He didn't know she was standing there. She didn't confront him. She simply walked back into the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at her hands. They were trembling. "I think I've been asleep," she told me during one of our first conversations. "Yes," I said, "not unconscious, just spiritually sedated, emotionally numbed by the slow drip anesthesia of manipulation disguised as care." You might expect the pain of betrayal to feel like fire, but often it's more like ice, cold, still, a hush falling over your life, where once there was noise, a silence so sudden it feels like truth finally entered the room and everything else bowed out. The philosopher Alan Watts once said that awakening always comes with a little pain, just like opening your eyes after a deep sleep into bright sunlight. And here's the hard truth. We don't talk about enough sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who seem the kindest. That's what makes it confusing. Their cruelty isn't obvious. It's slow, polished, sophisticated. It hides inside compliments. It dresses up as jokes. It carries your groceries while quietly rearranging your self-worth. But here's where your power returns when you stop waiting for the pain to be loud in order to take it seriously. When you learn that discomfort, even quiet discomfort, is information, you're not broken for not seeing it sooner. You weren't weak. You were loyal. You were hopeful. You were in love. And now, you are awake. I often tell clients this: the most dangerous part of emotional harm isn't the hurt itself. It's the fact that you didn't recognize it as hurt. That's what keeps you in it. Not the abuse, the confusion, the self-doubt, the silent argument between your intuition and your rationalizations. When Elena heard those words, "She's easy to control," it wasn't just a betrayal. It was confirmation of everything her body had already been whispering for years. That's the part I want to emphasize. Your nervous system always knows. Long before your mind makes sense of it, your body flinches. Your breath shortens. You feel smaller when they enter the room. You smile less, laugh less. You stop being yourself. So here's a tender invitation for you. If something hurts even quietly, don't dismiss it. Just sit with it. Name it. You don't have to act right away, but notice. Because noticing is the first mercy. What if the person who broke you was just showing you where you needed to be whole? Let's sit with that for a moment. This isn't about blaming the victim, and it's not about spiritual bypassing, pretending your pain is a gift before you're ready to see it that way. But it is about reclaiming authorship. Because sometimes after the hurt settles, you may begin to see that the person didn't create the wound, they revealed it. Not because they were wise, but because your soul was already asking for healing and they unknowingly gave it shape. This idea sparks a lot of strong feelings. Some people say, "No, don't give the abuser credit for my growth." And they're right. But others say, "If I learn to finally love myself because of what they did, maybe I can turn this pain into something sacred." Both can be true. Healing isn't binary. You can honor your suffering and extract wisdom from it. You can walk away stronger, not because of them, but because of what you chose to build after they tried to tear you down. Elena didn't confront him that night. She didn't need to. She had already left in spirit. Her departure would come weeks later, quiet and firm. She didn't slam the door. She simply stopped asking for it to stay open. "I feel like I've finally come home to myself," she whispered months into her healing. That's what waking up does. It doesn't just end the relationship. It ends the version of you that tolerated it. So if you're reading this and feeling something stir, don't ignore it. You're not breaking down. You're breaking open. And sometimes that's the most honest beginning there is. They say time heals all wounds, but that's not exactly true. What heals is understanding. What heals is acceptance. And sometimes what heals is the decision to stop waiting for an ending that makes sense. Michael came to me 5 months after his relationship ended. His voice was steady. He wasn't crying. But there was a strange stillness in him, like someone who'd been standing in the same emotional hallway too long. "She just disappeared," he said. "One day we were planning a weekend trip. 2 days later, she blocked me. No big fight, no explanation, just a clean exit with no answers." He had tried to reach out respectfully at first, then with a bit more urgency, then with anger. She never responded. "I don't even need her back," he told me, eyes down. "I just need to understand what happened." But here's the quiet tragedy of Michael's story. He wasn't waiting for her response. He was waiting for her to rewrite his pain. He wanted her to give him permission to move on, to say something that would close the chapter with dignity, something that would make the heartbreak make sense. But closure doesn't come like that. At some point, we must face the grief, not of the person, but of the apology we'll never receive. We think of closure like a door someone else must shut for us, but it's not. Closure isn't a moment, it's a practice, a private ritual of releasing our craving for clarity. Why? Because some people leave mid-sentence. Some people drop you in the middle of your becoming. And the fantasy that they'll come back with the missing piece is what keeps the wound from forming a scar. But here's the truth. We resist. You don't need every answer to heal. You need to stop assigning meaning where there was none. We suffer not from events, but from our judgment about them. We interpret silence as punishment, abandonment as evidence that we're not lovable, a cold goodbye as proof that we were forgettable. But what if none of that was true? What if their disappearance wasn't about your worth, but about their incapacity to face what they broke? One of the hardest truths I've seen people wrestle with, especially after a painful breakup or betrayal, is the idea that closure might never come from the person who hurt you. And even harder than that is realizing that maybe they don't even think they owe it. You may want an apology, they may want distance, you may want to understand, they may want to forget. And in this asymmetry, people get stuck like Michael did. He replayed the last conversation over and over. He wrote unsent messages. He kept her number saved just in case. But after a few sessions together, I gently asked him, "What if you never get an explanation? Could you still be free?" He looked at me stunned. Then he whispered, "I don't know." But that's where the real healing began. Not in forcing closure, but in accepting that healing does not require another person's participation. You don't need to hear "I'm sorry" to forgive. You don't need a final conversation to end a story. You don't need their voice to quiet your pain. Your peace is your decision. And in many cases, closure is just self-respect wrapped in silence. Do we need closure, or just the courage to stop checking if the door is still locked? Sit with that. Are we genuinely seeking truth? Or are we hoping that if we stay at the door long enough, the person who left will come back and change the ending? This quote stirs debate for good reason. Some say, no, we deserve closure. It's basic human decency, and I agree you deserve it. But what if the person who hurt you doesn't have the emotional maturity to offer it? Does your healing pause until they grow? If they never explain, I'll never be able to trust again. But trust in what that people won't leave, or that you can survive, even if they do. Closure is valuable, yes, but it's not always available. And your healing cannot be contingent on the morality of someone who already mistreated you. You don't have to hate them. You don't have to chase them. You can simply say, "This is enough. I'm done waiting to feel worthy." I asked Michael months into our work to try something different. Write the closure you wanted, but not for her, for you. He resisted at first. "I don't want to write fantasy," he said. I replied, "It's not fantasy, it's sovereignty." So he did. He wrote a letter that began, "You didn't choose me. That's your right. But I choose me now, and that's my freedom." He never sent it, but something in him shifted. He stopped rereading old texts. He deleted the screenshot of her last "I love you." And eventually, he smiled again without needing to know why it ended. That is what healing looks like. Not always loud, not always fast, but honest, grounded, quietly powerful, and no longer waiting at a door that was never meant to be home. Sometimes the real heartbreak isn't that they hurt you. It's that even after everything, they still don't understand why it hurt. A painter, a quiet soul who felt things more deeply than she ever let on. Her name was Clara. She had spent 2 years in a relationship with someone who didn't belittle her, at least not overtly. But every time she expressed sadness, he called her dramatic. Every time she shared something personal, he said she was too much. He never raised his voice, never cursed, but somehow she felt smaller every time they spoke. I kept trying to explain, she told me one afternoon. I'd write long texts trying to describe why something hurt. I'd pick my words carefully, hoping he'd finally say, "I get it now." But he never did. And it wasn't just him. When she finally left her friends, meaning well, asked her why. "But he seemed like such a nice guy," they said. "Are you sure you're not overthinking it?" That hurt even more. She looked at me with tired eyes and asked, "What's the point of healing if no one understands what you went through?" It was a tender question, one I've heard in many different voices in many different lives. And here's the soft truth I offered her. Healing is not about being understood. It's about learning to understand yourself so clearly, so gently, that no one else's confusion can make you question your truth again. There's a strange human urge to seek validation from the very people who caused us harm. It's not weakness, it's longing. Longing for coherence. Longing for someone to say, "You're not crazy." I did that. It wasn't fair. Longing for them to see us not through their lens of defensiveness, but through the truth of our pain. But here's the thing, some people will never see it. Not because your truth is invalid, but because their ego can't hold it. And that's not your burden to carry. The Stoics had a word for the peace that comes from letting go of others' opinions. Ataraxia, a calm so deep that even misunderstanding doesn't disturb you. You don't have to fight to prove your story. You don't need to debate your experience into existence. You get to say, "This hurt me and that alone is enough." When Clara asked me if her pain was real, I didn't give her logic. I gave her a mirror. I asked, what if the way your body tensed up every time he spoke wasn't overreaction, but a signal? What if the ache in your chest wasn't drama, but data? She was quiet. Then she nodded. Because the truth is our nervous systems don't lie. When someone consistently makes you feel unseen, unsafe, or unworthy, your body remembers, even if no one else does. I often remind clients, you don't need a consensus for your pain to be valid. You don't need the person who hurt you to sign your permission slip for healing. It's okay if they don't understand. It's okay if your friends don't either. It's okay to leave the courtroom of public opinion and rest in the stillness of self-trust. Is your peace worth the price of being understood by someone who's never tried to hear you? This one tends to crack people open because we're taught from childhood. If they don't understand, explain again. Be clearer, be kinder, try harder. But what if clarity isn't the issue? What if they heard you and chose not to honor what they heard? Some people say, but I need closure. I need them to know what they did. And yes, the desire to be understood is deeply human. But what if insisting on being understood is actually keeping you tied to the person you're trying to let go of? What if freedom means choosing peace, even when it's silent? Other people say, if I don't speak up, how will they learn? And that's a noble thought. But not everyone learns just because you offer the lesson. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop talking, not out of anger, but out of trust in yourself, in your experience, in the sacredness of your own knowing. Clara stopped writing long texts. She stopped rehearsing conversations in her head. She painted instead. One of her pieces showed a small girl sitting in a field of sunflowers, eyes closed, holding her own hand. It didn't need words. It didn't explain anything. And yet, it said everything. That's what letting go looks like sometimes. Not a loud declaration, not a dramatic exit. Just a quiet decision to stop chasing acknowledgement and start practicing self-respect. So if you're reading this and someone still doesn't get it, remember, their understanding is optional. Your peace is not. Not all harm comes with shouting. Not all betrayal announces itself with slammed doors. Sometimes it's just the steady ache of absence, a phone that never lights up, a message read, never returned, a quiet that grows so loud it drowns out your own thoughts. Healing story. The woman who kept refreshing. Leah had been dating Daniel for nearly a year. It was slow and tender at first. They met through mutual friends, shared playlists, laughed about the same obscure movies. When he touched her hand, she said it felt like breathing. But over time, his presence dimmed. First it was delayed replies, then missed calls, then weekends where he needed space. Leah didn't panic, at least not at first. She was patient, thoughtful. She told herself maybe he's overwhelmed, maybe he just needs time. But weeks passed. She'd send him kind, careful messages. He'd leave them on read. No anger, no goodbye. Just silence that spread like fog. And in that silence, Leah began blaming herself. Did I say too much? Should I have been more chill? Maybe I pushed him away. When she came to see me, she looked tired. Not just emotionally, but spiritually. As if her soul had been knocking on a door that no one had any intention of opening. I just wish he would say something, she whispered. Even if it's over, I need to hear it. I looked at her gently. But Leah, he already said it, just not with words. We've been conditioned to think that closure comes in sentences, that the end of something must be spoken, declared or written. But some people don't have the emotional capacity or courage to give you that. They disappear instead. Avoid eye contact. Leave your texts unanswered, not because they didn't receive them, but because they don't want to engage with what your presence represents, accountability. But here's the quiet truth that hurts and heals at once. Silence is an answer. It may not be the one you wanted, but it is the one they gave. The Stoics taught us not to chase what is outside of our control. If someone chooses to remove themselves from your life, their absence speaks louder than their excuses ever would. Your job is not to decode their silence. Your job is to trust the message it carries and then choose how you wish to respond. Leah's story isn't rare. I've heard versions of it from people across every age, culture and background. The ghosting, the fade out, the person who once couldn't stop texting you now pretending you don't exist. And the mind, being the curious and cruel thing it is, tries to fill the silence. We imagine reasons. We create scenarios. We give the benefit of the doubt far past the point of our own emotional safety. But here's what I gently tell clients like Leah. If someone's silence causes you to doubt your worth, their voice wouldn't have saved you either. Because real closure doesn't come from hearing them say it's over. It comes from realizing I deserve more than this. Their silence was a mirror, not of your inadequacy, but of their inability to hold something as tender as your heart. What if their silence is louder than any goodbye? This quote tends to split the room. Some people say, "No, I need words. I need someone to tell me exactly why they left." Others say, "If they disappear without explanation, that tells me everything I need to know." And both reactions are valid. But here's where it gets deeper. What if your insistence on a verbal goodbye is really about control? About needing to make the ending make sense? But what if sense isn't the goal and peace is? What if their silence isn't cruelty but capacity? What if they don't have the emotional vocabulary to tell you the truth and so they run from it? And most of all, what if trying to drag meaning out of silence only delays your healing? Sometimes letting go isn't about understanding them. It's about believing yourself, believing the knot in your stomach, the tightness in your chest, the instinct that whispers, "This hurts because it's wrong." Leah stopped sending messages. She wrote one last text. Not to get a reply, but to release her voice into the void. "I don't need you to answer. Your silence already did that for you. I just needed to hear my own courage again." She never got a response. But a few weeks later, she began painting again, sleeping more, laughing louder, not because she'd moved on overnight, but because she finally stopped waiting for permission to begin. That's what reclaiming yourself looks like. Not shouting, not begging, not asking for someone else to explain what your intuition already knew. Just listening to the silence, to yourself, and choosing gently not to wait in a room where the lights have already gone out. You don't owe everyone an explanation, not for your boundaries, not for your silence, not even for your healing. Healing story. The daughter who finally stopped explaining. Sarah grew up with a father who always made her feel like love was a contract, conditional, full of fine print. He didn't hit. He didn't yell, but he controlled her through guilt. When she made decisions he didn't like, he'd say things like, "After everything I've done for you, is this how you repay me? You're being selfish again." As an adult, Sarah worked hard to earn his approval. When she got into college, she called him first. When she got engaged, she asked for his blessing. He didn't give it. Even when she had her first child, he visited briefly, then left early, complaining about traffic. Still, she explained, she justified, she tried, until one evening, after a particularly harsh phone call, she hung up and said out loud, quietly but clearly, "I don't have to keep explaining why I deserve to be treated with kindness." It wasn't a dramatic realization. It was a slow truth rising after years of emotional erosion. She called me a week later and said, "I don't want to cut him off, but I need space. I just don't want to keep telling him why." I told her, "You don't have to." We are taught, especially in families or long-term relationships, that leaving must be justified, that you can only walk away if you've collected enough proof of harm, that you must exhaust all efforts to fix things first, that you owe a proper explanation. But here's the deeper truth. Explanations are a gift, not a requirement. You don't need to build a courtroom case to justify your peace. You don't need to relive your wounds just to prove they were real. You don't need to be understood in order to be allowed to leave. The Stoics didn't waste time explaining their inner peace to people who couldn't perceive it. They acted in accordance with virtue, not validation. And so sometimes the most virtuous thing you can do is leave without fanfare, without drama, just clarity. When someone hurts you repeatedly, whether with words, withdrawal, manipulation, or disregard, there is a subtle erosion of self-trust. You start second-guessing your boundaries. You begin rehearsing how to make your pain sound reasonable. You fear being called difficult, emotional, or cold. But that fear isn't yours. It was taught. It was handed to you by people who benefited from your silence, your patience, your politeness. I've worked with dozens of people like Sarah, empathetic, self-aware, deeply loyal. And here's the thing I always try to remind them: you are allowed to leave quietly. You are allowed to protect your peace, even if they never understand why. In fact, some people will never understand. Not because your reasons weren't good enough, but because they were never truly listening in the first place. Who told you that healing must be polite? This one stirs strong emotions. Some people say, but I don't want to seem rude. I owe them at least a conversation. Others ask, but what if they feel abandoned? And here's where it gets nuanced. Yes, in healthy relationships, communication matters. Honesty is a form of respect. But in toxic dynamics, explaining your boundaries to someone who keeps crossing them is not respect, it's surrender. And if someone has consistently hurt you after explanations, pleas and tears, then your silence is not abandonment, it's self-preservation. You don't have to throw a grenade to leave. You don't need to slam the door. You can simply walk out softly, firmly, lovingly. And if they accuse you of being cold or unforgiving, let them. Their confusion is not your problem to solve. Sarah didn't write a dramatic letter. She didn't block his number out of spite. She just stopped explaining. She returned his calls less, responded with brief, neutral energy, focused more on her family, her art, her rest. Months passed. One day her father called and said, "You've changed." She replied gently, "I've stopped trying to make you comfortable at my expense." He didn't respond well, and she didn't explain it again. That's what healing can look like. A quiet withdrawal from places where you once begged to belong. A gentle reclaiming of your time, your voice, your nervous system. A silence that says, I love myself enough not to debate my boundaries. So if you've been stuck in the loop of explaining your exit, let this be your reminder. You're allowed to leave, without drama, without guilt, without turning your life into a courtroom. Sometimes the only justification you need is the calm that arrives when you're finally free. Sometimes the most powerful act of self-respect is not screaming, blocking, or confronting. It's simply not checking, not looking, not waiting, not watching. Healing story. The man who couldn't stop checking, last seen Jordan, was doing everything right after the breakup. He unfollowed her, muted stories, even deleted old pictures from his phone. But somehow she still lived in the corners of his mind. He'd open WhatsApp to check her last seen, not to message, just to see. A part of him hoped she noticed that he noticed. He wasn't looking for a reconciliation, he said. He just wanted to feel close. He'd rationalize it. It's just one tap, just curiosity. But that small digital peek done again and again kept her alive in his nervous system. I don't even know what I want from it, he admitted to me one session. I told him gently. Sometimes the need to check is less about them and more about who you are without them. What we pay attention to, we keep alive. And in the age of technology, our attention is more fractured and more revealing than ever. You might unfollow someone on social media, but still refresh their feed through a secret account, still read every comment, still ask mutual friends how they're doing, still dream about what they might be thinking. You are disturbed not by events, but by your opinion about them. It's not the last scene that hurts. It's the story you attach to it. Maybe they're online and not talking to me. Does that mean I didn't matter? Or they've posted a happy picture where they pretending to be broken like I was. But every time you check, you reopen the wound. You invite speculation. You feed the version of you that still seeks meaning in their absence. And worst of all, you delay the healing that begins the moment you stop needing to know. In therapy, we talk a lot about digital grief. Because in the past, when someone left your life, they were gone physically and emotionally. Now they linger on your feed, in your inbox, in the small blue dot of a seen message. Jordan wasn't weak for checking. He was human, trying to soothe the ache of uncertainty with digital breadcrumbs. But I asked him something that changed his approach. What if every time you check, you're proving to your nervous system that they still have power over your peace? He looked stunned. I thought it was just curiosity, he said. I smiled. But is curiosity supposed to hurt that much? Do you miss them or the identity you built around needing them? This quote always makes people pause, because sometimes it's not the person we're attached to. It's the role we played when they were in our life. Maybe they gave you a sense of purpose. Maybe being their partner, their fixer, their emotional support gave you meaning. Maybe you miss who you were when you felt needed, even if it was costing you peace. So when they leave, it's not just about loss. It's about identity collapse. That's why unfollowing is hard. Not because of them, but because of who you were when you were watching them. So ask yourself, is it really them you miss? Or is it the version of you who still believed you could make them stay? Jordan eventually blocked her number, not out of anger, but as an act of clarity. He stopped checking last seen, unfollowed her from the burner account he didn't tell anyone about, stopped asking mutual friends for updates. At first, he felt the panic of disconnection. What if she tries to reach out? What if I miss it? One morning he told me I opened my phone and realized I didn't think about her all day yesterday. And that's when I knew he was beginning to unfollow her, not just online, but in his mind. That's the real unfollow. Not the click, not the block, but the steady, sacred choice to reclaim your attention. So, if you're here refreshing someone else's life while neglecting your own, let this be your invitation. Close the tab. Mute the noise, choose presence over pattern, and remember, you are not missing out, you are moving on. Some memories are not real, not because they didn't happen, but because your mind re-edited them to protect your heart. Healing story. The woman who reread her old journal. Maya used to say her ex was the love of her life. They met when she was 25. He was kind, spontaneous, and told her she was different. For the first few months, she felt seen in ways she hadn't experienced before. Even when the relationship grew difficult, when he became critical, jealous, and distant, Maya held on. After the breakup, she was devastated. But not just by the end, by the stories she kept telling herself. He made me feel so alive. We had something rare. If only I had tried harder. But something didn't sit right. The grief felt heavier than love. So one night she opened her old journals, just to remember, and what she read broke her heart, not because of what he did, but because of what she had forgotten. There in her own handwriting were entries like, "He criticized my body again today. I said nothing. He disappeared for 3 days and said I was being needy. Why do I feel like I'm always walking on eggshells?" Tears ran down her face, not from pain, but from recognition. "I thought we had something beautiful," she told me, "but now I'm not sure what was real." Your mind is not a historian. It's an editor, a protector, a storyteller. And one of its favorite tricks, rewriting memories to fit the version of the story you needed to believe at the time. When you miss someone, especially someone who hurt you, your brain often doesn't remember the whole person. It remembers the potential, the warmth between the storms, the few golden hours that kept you holding on. It forgets the loneliness that lived inside your laughter. It forgets how often you cried on the bathroom floor. The obstacle is the way. In other words, don't run from the hard parts. Look straight at them. Because true clarity isn't just remembering the good, it's remembering the full truth and choosing to honor it. When Maya reread her journal, she felt two things: shame for ignoring the red flags, and grief for the time she lost trying to fix something that was always broken. I reminded her, you didn't ignore the signs, you survived them. We don't forget pain because we're foolish. We forget because we needed to function, to go to work, to show up for friends, to not fall apart. That's how the psyche protects itself, by softening sharp edges until we feel safe enough to remember. But here's what I always tell clients. When the truth starts resurfacing, don't fight it. Welcome it. Not to blame yourself, but to finally walk away with both eyes open. Because healing doesn't mean just letting go of the person. It means letting go of the illusion that they were ever who you wanted them to be. Are you missing the person or missing who you were before they hurt you? This question stings, and that's why it heals. Sometimes what we mourn isn't them, but the version of ourselves that still believed love wouldn't hurt this much. Maybe you miss how you used to laugh more, how you dreamed without fear, how you loved without keeping score. And maybe the grief isn't about losing them, but about losing the you that trusted too deeply, too quickly, too much. Some will say, no, I miss them. They were special. And yes, there's nothing wrong with cherishing real connection. But the moment you start romanticizing someone who consistently made you feel small, you must ask, was it love? Or was it survival dressed as longing? Maya kept her journal, but she started writing in it again this time, not to record the pain, but to rewrite her truth. Not to rewrite history, but to reclaim her voice in it. Her final entry about him read, I wanted him to be the love of my life, but what I really needed was to become the love of my own. She no longer flinches when she hears his name, not because she forgot, but because she finally remembered enough to let it go. So if you're still clinging to a highlight reel, if your memory keeps playing the good scenes on loop, pause. Ask what's been edited out. You deserve to remember the whole story. Not just the smiles, but the silences. Not just the promises, but the patterns. Because when memories lie, they keep you in love with a ghost. And you were not meant to haunt your own life. Some people hurt you deeply, and then expect you to be the one who stays kind. But what if you could walk away, not with bitterness, but with breath? Healing story, the man who let go without a grudge. Andre had every reason to hate her. She lied, she cheated, she borrowed money she never paid back. And when he finally confronted her, she turned it around. You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. You made me feel trapped. Even in her betrayal, she claimed victimhood. For weeks after the breakup, Andre was livid. Not because he wanted her back, he didn't, but because he felt robbed. Robbed of time, of trust, of emotional safety. He'd lie awake at night crafting things he wished he had said. He'd imagine running into her and finally getting revenge with his indifference. But no matter how many fake scenarios he played in his mind, the anger stayed. So he came to therapy, sat down and said, I don't want to carry this hate, but I also don't want to let her off the hook. I looked at him and said gently, letting go is not the same as letting someone get away with it. We often equate forgiveness with permission, with weakness, with erasing what happened. But that's not forgiveness, that's denial. True letting go doesn't excuse what they did. It simply says, I'm no longer going to drink poison hoping you'll feel the pain. Onto anger is like being burned twice. Once by the event and again by the echo of your own resistance. Hate is heavy. It consumes. It requires energy to sustain. And most of all, it binds you to the very person you want to be free from. To hate them is to stay in relationship with them, even after they've gone. But to release that hate, that's when you begin to return to yourself. When Andre told me he was afraid that forgiveness would mean saying, it was okay, I told him this. You can forgive without forgetting. You can heal without reconciling. You can release without returning. Letting go is not about pretending the hurt didn't happen. It's about acknowledging the truth so clearly that you no longer need it to define you. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as a moral virtue, but sometimes it's just a neurological decision to stop replaying a loop that drains your peace. I asked Andre, what if your freedom isn't in being right, but in being light? He went quiet, then smiled, not because it was easy, but because it finally made sense. If forgiveness is freedom, why do we wear resentment like armor? This quote tends to divide people. Some say I'm not ready to forgive. They don't deserve it. And that's fair. Forgiveness should never be rushed. You're allowed to feel angry, to grieve, to rage. Others ask, why should I forgive someone who never apologized? And here's the truth. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give them. It's a gift you give yourself, so that your nervous system can finally exhale. Still others say, but anger motivates me. It reminds me not to get hurt again. That's understandable. But beware, what protects can also imprison. Anger sharpens us for a time, but long term, it exhausts us. And hate, once useful, can become a mask for deeper pain, rejection, sadness, betrayal. So here's the radical thought. What if peace is more powerful than punishment? What if your highest revenge is joy? Andre never confronted her again. He didn't need to. Instead, he wrote her a letter he never sent. In it, he said, "You hurt me. You took parts of me I had saved for someone safe. But I've come to realize what you did says more about your pain than my worth. I'm not excusing it, but I'm done carrying it." He folded the letter, burned it in a small dish, watched the smoke rise and whispered, "That's enough." He didn't feel instantly healed, but the next day he walked to work without checking her social. He made breakfast without replaying arguments. He breathed a little deeper. And that's how healing happens. Not in thunder, but in quiet, steady air. So if you're still angry, still aching, still tempted to hate them because it feels like the only thing left, pause, breathe, and ask, what if letting go is the bravest thing I could do now? Not for them, for me. You may think you're not grieving. After all, they weren't good for you. They hurt you. You're relieved it's over. So why do you feel like crying in the middle of the grocery store? Healing's story. The woman who didn't miss him but still mourned, Nina, was sure she was done. Her ex had been emotionally absent, manipulative, and sometimes cruel with his silence. She left with clarity. She blocked him, deleted photos, and even started therapy. She told her friends, "I don't miss him. I miss nothing about him." And she meant it. But 2 months later, she found herself crying uncontrollably while folding laundry. A random sweater he never even saw triggered a flood of emotion. "What's wrong with me?" she asked during one of our sessions. "I don't want him back. Why do I feel like I'm in mourning?" I said to her gently, "Because you are. You're grieving the version of life you hoped for with him." She didn't miss him. She missed the future they never had. The version of herself she thought she'd get to be with him. The dream that died quietly, painfully, and without a funeral. We often associate grief with death, but grief is broader and more subtle. You can grieve people who are still alive. You can grieve what could have been. You can grieve the energy, time, and love you gave to someone who never really saw it. Not with despair, but with reverence. Epictetus wrote, "Never say of anything, 'I lost it,' but rather, 'I returned it.'" But sometimes we're not ready to return a relationship. Sometimes we just want to scream, "This wasn't fair." And it's okay to feel that. You are not weak for grieving someone you don't want back. You are human. And part of healing is mourning not just them, but the part of you that believed in the promise they never kept. Nina's confusion is one I see often. Clients will say, "I'm angry. I'm glad it's over." But then they'll break down crying when they see a photo, hear a song, or walk past a place they used to go together. What they're feeling isn't nostalgia. It's grief in disguise. Grief doesn't always look like black clothes and flowers. Sometimes it's a craving for closure. Sometimes it's an old email you can't bring yourself to delete. Sometimes it's staring at your phone knowing you'll never see their name light up your screen again and still hoping. But what makes this grief harder is the guilt that often follows it. Why am I still upset? What does it say about me if I cry over someone toxic? Here's what it says. It says you were open. It says you had hope. It says you're not numb. And that's not weakness. That's aliveness. Is it them you miss? Or the dream that died with them? This quote unearths something deep. Many people respond with both. I miss who I thought they were and the life I imagined. Others say I don't miss them at all. I just feel like something in me got erased. And they're all right. Grief is rarely about just the person. It's about the version of yourself you were becoming in their presence. It's about the home you tried to build inside them. It's about the future that now no longer exists, and how little ceremony there is for that kind of loss. So ask yourself, is it their voice you miss, or how you imagined your life would sound with them in it? Nina didn't need to be told to move on. She needed to be allowed to mourn, not for a man who deserved her, but for the love she poured, for the years she lost, for the innocence of still believing they could change. We created a small ritual. She wrote a letter to the life that didn't happen, not to him, but to the version of her that waited, loved, and stayed too long. It began, you tried, and that matters. I'm sorry they never became who you needed, but I see you now, and I promise we're going forward, not backward. She read it aloud to herself, then burned it in a bowl on her balcony, watched the smoke rise like a silent prayer, and cried not from regret, but from release. So if you feel something heavy, lingering after the letting go, don't rush to label it weakness. Don't bury it beneath gratitude. Let it breathe. It's not obsession. It's not longing. It's grief. And grief, when honored, becomes clarity. Letting go isn't just about moving on from them. It's about becoming the kind of person their absence can no longer break. Healing story. The man who wanted revenge, but found himself. Eli spent months replaying the betrayal. His ex didn't just lie. She lied with precision, carefully, coldly. And when the truth finally came out, she looked him in the eye and said, "You should have seen it coming." He was shattered, not just by her infidelity, but by the smugness with which she handed him his pain. He wanted revenge, not violence, not drama, but something subtler. He wanted her to see how well he could thrive without her. He started posting curated photos, made sure mutual friends accidentally mentioned his new job, his new body, his new smile. But inside he wasn't healed. He was dressing his wound with success, not care. "I want her to know she didn't destroy me," he told me. And I replied softly, "You want to become someone who no longer needs her to know anything at all." There's a version of strength that's loud. It gets the haircut, posts the quote, blocks the number and makes sure everyone knows. But the deeper version of strength is quieter. It's not about showing them what they lost. It's about becoming someone who finally sees what you almost sacrificed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." And in modern terms, that means this: you don't have to outsmart them. You don't have to outperform them. You just have to outgrow the version of you that still needed their apology to feel whole. Eli's transformation began not when he unfollowed her, but when he stopped building his identity around her shadow. He stopped needing to be seen thriving. He started actually healing. Here's what I told him, and I offer this to you as well. Healing isn't when they can't hurt you anymore. Healing is when you stop needing them to try. That shift, subtle but profound, is where emotional freedom begins. Because as long as you're waiting for them to notice your growth, you're still tethered to their opinion. You're still performing. And healing is not a performance. It's a quiet returning to yourself. Do you want justice or peace? This quote stirs something raw. Some say, "Why can't I have both? Why should they get away with it?" Others reply, justice is just a longer chain if it keeps you attached to them. And it's a fair tension. We crave justice because pain feels unfinished without consequence. But justice from someone who lacks self-awareness is often just another disappointment waiting to happen. Peace, on the other hand, doesn't wait. It's a choice you make not because they deserve it, but because you do. So here's the deeper question. If no apology came, if no karma returned, if they never saw what they did, could you still be okay? That's what becoming untouchable looks like. Not cold, not guarded, just grounded. Eli eventually stopped posting for her to see. He started journaling again. He forgave himself for staying too long not seeing the signs, believing lies. He told me months later, I used to want her to regret it. Now I just want peace in my own bones. And he had it. Not because she apologized, not because he proved anything, but because he stopped trying to win a game that was never about love in the first place. So if you're still building a life just to show someone they lost you, pause. What if you built it for you instead? What if the ultimate revenge was no longer needing revenge at all, because the person who hurt you may never change? But you can become someone they can't reach. Not because you built walls, but because you finally grew roots. Sometimes the strength that saves you is not the strength that heals you. Sometimes strength looks like weeping in the shower, admitting you're not okay, whispering, I still miss them, even after everything they did. Healing story. The woman who finally admitted it still hurt. Alina had walked away from him. Everyone said she was brave. He had gaslit her, told her she was too sensitive, flirted in front of her, vanished for days when she brought up concerns. And worst of all, he always turned her emotions against her. So when she left, people called her an example of courage. She posted affirmations. She smiled in group photos. She told everyone, I'm doing better now. But behind closed doors, she wasn't eating much. She couldn't sleep. And there were nights she'd hug a pillow to her chest and sob into it, not because she wanted him back, but because the ache refused to leave. When she told me about those nights, she immediately apologized. I know I'm supposed to be stronger than this. I looked at her softly and said, but what if this is strength too? We often confuse emotional suppression with resilience. We think crying means regression, that admitting we're not over it means weakness. But that isn't wisdom. That's emotional self-abandonment disguised as discipline. Seneca wrote about grief as a natural part of being human. He didn't say don't feel, he said feel fully, but don't drown in it forever. There's a sacred power in saying, this hurts more than I thought it would. I'm not okay right now. I'm tired of being strong. Because healing is not a staircase, it's a spiral. And some days you'll visit the same wound again, not because you're failing, but because you're peeling it back with deeper compassion. I often meet clients in the middle of this tension, wanting to move on, but haunted by the idea that if they show pain, they've regressed. Here's what I remind them. Your emotions are not an inconvenience. They are evidence of your aliveness. Alina didn't need to be told to stay strong. She needed permission to fall apart gently. And that's the paradox of healing. You grow stronger the moment you stop pretending to be. The body doesn't lie. If your stomach tightens, if your sleep breaks, if your breath shortens, those are not signs of failure. They are signs of truth asking for your attention. The sooner you stop trying to be unbreakable, the sooner you realize you were never broken. You were just tired of holding it all in. What if your softness is your superpower? This quote often splits the room. Some respond with, but being soft got me hurt. And yes, when you love deeply, you bleed deeply. But others reply, my softness is what kept me human when they treated me like I didn't matter. In a world that rewards detachment, compassion becomes an act of defiance. Your softness doesn't mean you're naive. It means you stayed tender in a place that wanted to harden you. And that, ironically, is strength. But don't confuse that with availability. You can be soft and still say no. You can grieve and still have boundaries. You can cry and still walk away. So ask yourself, what if being strong doesn't mean being stoic, but being real? Alina started saying something new when friends asked how she was doing. She no longer said, "I'm fine." She said, "I'm healing, slowly, and some days hurt." At first, people didn't know how to respond, but then something beautiful happened. More people opened up to her. They admitted their own breakups still stung. They started being real too. That's the power of emotional honesty. It doesn't make you look weak. It makes others feel safe. Alina still has hard days, but now she doesn't shame herself for them. She doesn't perform strength, she embodies truth. And in that quiet vulnerability, she found what she'd been missing all along. Not validation, not revenge, not even closure, but kindness, the kind that begins within. So if you're tired of being strong all the time, here's your permission to rest, to cry, to whisper. This still hurts, and no, that doesn't mean you've gone backward. It just means you're still healing. And healing, my friend, is never weakness. It's the most radical form of strength. Letting go isn't a moment. It's not a line you cross. It's a decision you make again and again and again, until one day you notice the weight isn't there anymore. Healing story. The man who wrote the same letter every day, Thomas didn't expect to miss her this much. They had only dated for 10 months. It wasn't dramatic. No cheating, no betrayal, just a quiet, aching incompatibility. She needed freedom. He needed presence. When they broke up, it was mature, respectful, civil. But afterward, he felt like someone had vacuumed the color out of his life. He missed the way she touched his wrist mid-sentence. He missed her quiet humming in the kitchen. He missed the hope. At first, he tried to stay rational, told himself it wasn't meant to be. That closure had happened. That time would heal. But he still woke up every morning thinking of her. So I offered something strange. What if you wrote a goodbye letter to her every day? Not to send, not for her, but as a daily practice, a gentle ritual, a slow release. He hesitated, but he tried. The first letter was angry, the second full of longing, the third quiet and empty. The seventh ended with, "I think I'm starting to understand that loving you and letting you go are not opposites." And on the 23rd day, he forgot to write. That was the day he realized the practice had worked. We imagine healing like a finish line. One day you're broken, the next you're free. But that's not how the heart works. The heart heals in circles. It loops back through old memories. It reopens to test the scar. It whispers, "Are we really safe now?" And the answer over time becomes yes, we are. But not through one moment of courage, through many small acts of grace. They didn't try to fix their pain in one leap. They returned to the same questions, the same reminders, the same truths, until they became habits of the soul. And letting go works the same way. You let go when you stop checking their profile. You let go when you pause before texting. You let go when you choose silence over drama. You let go when you choose to breathe instead of explain, again and again, until it becomes who you are. I often hear this question, how do I finally let go of someone? And my answer is always this, you don't. You practice. Letting go isn't about deleting them from memory. It's about gently choosing yourself every day they try to re-enter your thoughts. It's waking up and saying, today I won't argue with a ghost. Today I won't perform closure. Today I'll return to my breath before I return to the past. And some days you'll slip. You'll check their page. You'll reread an old message. You'll wonder what they're doing now. That's okay. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is presence. To notice when you reach backward and lovingly guide yourself forward again. What if letting go isn't a single act but a sacred rhythm? This quote softens the myth of the dramatic ending. Some say no. I need a moment, a decision, a a declaration. Others say, if I have to keep letting go, does that mean I never truly healed? But what if both are illusions? What if healing is more like breathing? Inhale, remember what happened. Exhale, choose peace anyway. Not once, not twice, but daily, hourly, moment by moment. The strength isn't in never thinking of them again. The strength is in how gently you guide your thoughts back to center. Thomas doesn't write letters anymore. He doesn't need to, but he still keeps a journal, still lights a candle some evenings, not for her, but for himself. He said to me, I thought I had to forget her to be free, but I just needed to forgive myself for still loving the idea of her. And that's the truth most people avoid. Sometimes a piece of them stays with you, not because you're weak, but because you gave deeply. The point is not to erase them. The point is to live so fully now that the memory no longer defines you. So if you're still holding on, still hurting, still wondering why it's taking so long, let this be your whisper. Healing isn't something I'll finish. It's something I'll carry gently. Until one day, I forget I was carrying it at all. You're not behind, you're just becoming. And becoming always takes time. Letting go is not a single moment. It's not a light switch. It's not something you wake up one day having accomplished. It's a quiet return, a decision you revisit, a breath you take when the ache resurfaces and you choose not to chase it. You let go when you stop rewriting the story to make them kinder than they were. You stop checking for signs that maybe they still care. You stop needing them to understand why you left. You stop needing closure, apology, or revenge. You stop hating yourself for loving them longer than you should have. You stop being ashamed of your softness. You stop waiting for the grief to disappear and begin learning to carry it gracefully. You let go the first time you whisper, I deserve better. You let go again when you act on it. You let go a third time when you grieve who you had to be just to survive them. And every time you feel like you're back at the beginning, you're actually spiraling upward closer to peace than you've ever been. You weren't weak. You were devoted. Let this be said clearly. You weren't a fool. You weren't naive. You weren't too sensitive or too emotional. You were someone who hoped, who gave, who tried to hold a relationship together with bare hands and bruised trust. That's not weakness. That's heart. And now as you gently remove your heart from where it was never truly held, you are not becoming harder. You are becoming clearer. You don't need to hate them to be free. This is the truth most people avoid. You can let go of someone without vilifying them. You can honor the good and still walk away. You can admit to loving them and still accept they were not right for your peace. Letting go is not revenge. It is release, not to punish them, but to set yourself free from needing to keep the story alive. What comes after the hurt? After the hurt comes the rebuilding. And rebuilding doesn't start with a new person. It starts with you, with mornings that are no longer dictated by their silence, with a nervous system that no longer flinches at kindness, with joy that isn't borrowed from anyone else's attention, with peace that arrives softly, steadily, as you become someone who protects your own heart first. Letting go doesn't just remove them. It makes space for you to finally come home to yourself. The final whisper. So if there is still a part of you that aches, that waits, that wonders, that loops through the same old questions, breathe. You are not broken. You are just in the process of releasing. And that process, it's not linear. It's not perfect, it's not loud, but it is real, it is sacred, and it is yours. You don't need to rush it. You don't need to make it beautiful. You just need to keep showing up gently, honestly, one heartbeat, one morning, one memory at a time, until one day you notice you haven't thought of them all day, and you smile not because they're gone, but because you're back.